Okay, guys, I need to spill every single detail about yesterday because it's been running through my mind like a movie I can't pause. I'm Emma, 20 years old, just a college sophomore trying to balance classes, a part-time job, and keeping my tiny apartment from turning into a disaster zone. I thought I was just popping across the hall to ask my neighbor Ethan for a quick favor, nothing major. Just a hand with a jar I couldn't reach. He's married, completely off limits, and I swear I meant to keep it simple. But the way he looked at me, the way our small talk turned into something deeper, something electric, it was like the air itself was charged with possibility. My heart's still racing, and I need to tell you every moment of it. Stick with me and please like and subscribe for more stories like this. The late afternoon sun streamed through the slatted blinds of my small apartment, casting long striped shadows across the scuffed hardwood floor. I, Emma, stood in my cramped kitchen, balanced precariously on my tiptoes, stretching toward the top shelf of a rickety cabinet where a jar of marinara sauce sat just out of reach. My fingers grazed the cool glass, but it wobbled, threatening to tip over and splatter red sauce across my already cluttered counter. I groaned, stepping back and brushing a strand of dark hair from my face, my frustration bubbling over. At 20, I was used to handling things on my own psychology classes at State University. Utility bills, a barista job that barely covered rent, but the stupid jar was winning, and I wasn't about to climb the counter and risk a trip to the ER. I glanced around my tiny kitchen, a nook barely big enough for a stove, a fridge, and a sink that always seemed to have one dirty dish too many. My apartment was modest, but it was mine, a cozy space I'd tried to make my own with string lights draped over the windows, a couple of struggling succulents on the sill, and a secondhand couch that sagged in the middle. The living area was a chaotic mix of psychology textbooks, half-finished coffee mugs, and a laptop perpetually open to a lecture slide I should have been studying. I needed that marinara for a simple spaghetti dinner, my go-to when I was too exhausted to get creative, but unless I magically grew a few inches, I was out of luck. That's when I thought of Ethan, my neighbor across the hall. Ethan and his wife, Claire, had moved into the building about 4 months ago, and I'd seen them enough to exchange polite smiles and small talk in the hallway. Claire was a lawyer, always rushing off in tailored blazers and sharp heels, her blonde bob sleek and professional, her eyes focused like she was already mentally in a courtroom. Ethan, on the other hand, was the opposite, casual, warm, with an easy smile that made you feel like you'd known him forever. He was probably in his early 30s, with dark blonde hair that always looked slightly tousled, hazel eyes that seemed to catch every detail, and broad shoulders that made his flannel shirts or t-shirts look unfairly good. Not that I was paying attention. He was married after all, and I was just the college kid next door. Still, Ethan was my best bet. He worked from home, freelance, graphic design. I gathered from our brief chats, so he was likely around. We'd talked before about the noisy upstairs neighbor who vacuumed at midnight, the new coffee shop a block away that made a killer latte, or the time the building's elevator got stuck for an hour. He always had this way of looking at me, his hazel eyes warm and attentive, like he was really listening, not just nodding along. His smile lingered a little too long sometimes, and I'd caught myself smiling back, my cheeks warming before I could stop them. I pushed the thought away, grabbing my phone from the counter. It was 4:45 p.m., and Claire was probably still at her law firm, buried in case files. I chewed my lip, debating. Asking for help felt silly, but I wasn't about to let a jar of sauce defeat me. I slipped on my white sneakers, smoothed my cropped tank top and black leggings, and checked my reflection in the small mirror by the door. My dark hair was pulled into a loose ponytail, a few strands escaping around my face, and my cheeks were slightly flushed from the kitchen struggle. I looked fine, I guess. Casual, but not a total disaster. I took a deep breath and headed across the hall, my heart giving a little jump as I knocked on Ethan's door. The sound echoed in the quiet hallway, and I scolded myself. It's just a favor, Emma. Chill. The door swung open, and there he was, wearing a fitted gray t-shirt and faded jeans. His dark blonde hair must like he'd been hunched over his laptop all day. His hazel eyes lit up when he saw me, and that smile, God, that smile spread across his face, warm and a little mischievous, crinkling the corners of his eyes. Emma, he said, his voice low and welcoming, leaning against the doorframe like he had all the time in the world. What's up? I tucked a strand of hair behind my ear, suddenly hyper aware of how close we were standing. The faint scent of his cologne, something woodsy and clean, hitting me. Hey, Ethan, I need a quick favor. There's this jar in my kitchen I can't reach, and I'm about 2 seconds from climbing the counter like an idiot. Any chance you could help? He chuckled, the sound low and easy, making my stomach flutter. A jar? That's the emergency? He stepped back, gesturing for me to lead the way, his eyes sparkling with amusement. All right, let's save you from your climbing expedition. I laughed, turning to head back to my apartment, feeling his presence behind me like a warm shadow. Don't judge. Not all of us are blessed with your height. My height? He teased, following me across the hall, his footsteps soft on the worn carpet. I'm barely 6 feet. You're just vertically challenged. I glanced over my shoulder, raising an eyebrow. Vertically challenged? Rude. I'm 5'2", thank you very much. He grinned, stepping into my apartment as I held the door open. 5'2" and feisty. Noted. My cheeks warmed, but I kept my tone light, leading him to the kitchen. My apartment felt smaller with him in it, his broad frame filling the space as he glanced around, taking in the string lights, the cluttered coffee table, the succulents that were somehow still alive despite my neglect. Nice place, he said, his voice genuine, his eyes lingering on the details. Feels like you. I raised an eyebrow, leaning against the counter, trying to ignore the way my pulse quickened. Feels like me? What's that supposed to mean? He shrugged, his smile turning playful as he scanned the room. Cozy. A little chaotic, but in a good way. Like you've got stories in every corner, books, plants, that random mug with a cat on it. I laughed, glancing at the mug on my coffee table, a gift from a friend that I'd never gotten around to putting away. Careful, Ethan. You're gonna make me think you're paying too much attention. He grinned, his eyes meeting mine, a spark of something warm and curious in them. Maybe I am. The air shifted, just for a moment, and I felt my heart skip a beat. I pointed to the cabinet, steering us back to safer ground. Up there, I said, my voice a little too bright. Top shelf, marinara sauce. It's mocking me. He chuckled, moving to the cabinet and reaching up effortlessly, his t-shirt lifting slightly to reveal a sliver of tan skin at his waist. I turned away, grabbing a dish towel and pretending to wipe the counter, my cheeks burning. He retrieved the jar, turning to me with a triumphant grin, holding it out like a trophy. Got it. Crisis averted. My hero, I said, rolling my eyes, but smiling, trying to keep the moment light. I took the jar from him, our fingers brushing for a split second. The contact sent a tiny jolt through me, like a spark that lingered in the air. And I set the jar down quickly, hoping he didn't notice the flush creeping up my neck. Thanks. I owe you one. He waved it off, but his eyes lingered on me, warm and curious, like he was seeing me for the first time. No big deal. Happy to help. He didn't move to leave, though, just stood there, his hands in his pockets, his posture relaxed but his gaze steady. So what's the marinara for? Big cooking plans? I laughed, leaning against the counter opposite him, keeping the small island between us as a buffer. Big plans? Hardly. Just spaghetti. I'm a broke college student, so it's pasta or ramen most nights. He raised an eyebrow, his smile turning playful. Spaghetti, huh? Fancy. You sure you're not secretly a chef? Oh, definitely not, I said, matching his tone, crossing my arms with a grin. Unless burning toast counts as culinary skill. What about you? You strike me as the type who's got a secret recipe or two up his sleeve. He chuckled, shifting closer, his voice dropping slightly, teasing but warm. You're trying to figure me out, aren't you? I'll let you in on a secret. I make a mean grilled cheese. Claire says it's my only redeeming kitchen skill. My heart twinged at the mention of his wife, a sharp reminder of the line I couldn't cross. Claire was real, not just a name, but a person with a life intertwined with his, and I had no business letting my thoughts wander. But I kept my smile in place, tilting my head to keep the banter going. Grilled cheese? That's your big move? I'm disappointed, Ethan. I was expecting at least a homemade pasta sauce to go with my marinara rescue. He clutched his chest, feigning offense, his hazel eyes sparkling with amusement. Ouch. You wound me, Emma. Grilled cheese is an art form. You'd be impressed. I laughed, the sound louder than I intended, and he grinned, clearly pleased with himself. The air between us felt lighter, but there was an undercurrent, a spark that made my pulse quicken. I needed to keep this friendly, not flirty, but it was hard when he was standing there. His smile warm, and his eyes locked on mine like I was the only person in the room. Okay, fine, I said, crossing my arms tighter, trying to ground myself. Prove it sometime. I'll be the judge. His eyebrows shot up and his smile turned mischievous, a glint of challenge in his eyes. Is that a challenge? 'Cause I don't back down from those. My stomach fluttered and I bit my lip, trying to keep my cool. Maybe it is, but don't cry when I give you a bad review. He laughed, shaking his head, but his eyes didn't leave mine, and the air between us thickened, like we were both aware of the line we were dancing around. You're trouble, Emma. I can tell, he said, his voice low, teasing, but with an edge that made my heart race. Trouble's not always a bad thing, I said, my voice softer now, almost daring. The words slipped out before I could stop them, and for a moment the kitchen felt too small. The space between us charged with something unspoken. He was married. I was just the neighbor, but the way he was looking at me, like he was seeing me for the first time, made it hard to think straight. He cleared his throat, stepping back slightly, breaking the moment. So, he said, his tone shifting to something more casual, though his eyes still held that warmth. What's the deal with you? College, right? What's your major? I nodded, grateful for the change in topic, though part of me missed the sophomore at State. Psychology. I'm trying to figure out why people do what they do. Like, why someone would leave a jar just out of reach to torture their neighbor. He laughed, leaning against the counter again, closer than before, his arm brushing the edge of the island. Psychology, huh? That's dangerous. You're probably analyzing me right now. Maybe I am, I said, tilting my head with a grin, feeling a surge of confidence. Let's see. Married, works from home, probably spends too much time staring at a screen, secretly wishes he could loosen up a little. His eyes narrowed, but his smile didn't fade, and he leaned in just a fraction, his voice dropping. You're good. Too good. He paused, then added, and what about you? What's Emma's deal, besides terrorizing neighbors with Zia-related emergencies? I laughed, hopping up to sit on the counter, my sneakers dangling, the cool edge of the counter grounding me. Not much to tell. College, barista job, trying to keep my plants alive. Pretty boring, actually. Boring? He said, his voice low and teasing, his eyes locking onto mine. I don't buy that. You've got a spark, Emma. I can see it. My cheeks warmed, and I looked down at my hands, suddenly shy, my fingers twisting around the dish towel. A spark, huh? Careful, Ethan. You keep talking like that, I might start believing you. He grinned, his eyes warm and searching. Maybe you should. A little confidence never hurt anyone. The air between us thickened again, and I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady. I knew I should steer this back to safer ground, but part of me didn't want to. Part of me wanted to see how far this could go, even though I knew it was wrong. So, I said, forcing a lighter tone, what's the deal with you? You're always holed up in your apartment. Don't you ever get out? He chuckled, running a hand through his hair, making it even messier in a way that was unfairly charming. Not as much as I'd like. Work keeps me busy, and when Claire's around, we're usually running around after her schedule. It's a lot. I nodded, sensing the weight behind his words, the hint of something heavier beneath his easy smile. Sounds like you could use a break, I said, keeping my tone playful. Maybe a grilled cheese competition to shake things up? He laughed, his eyes lighting up, and he leaned forward slightly, his elbow resting on the island. You're not letting that go, are you? Nope, I said, grinning, swinging my legs slightly. I'm holding you to it. We stood there for a moment, the silence stretching between us, filled with unspoken tension. I knew I should ask him to leave, but I didn't want to. Not yet. My eyes drifted to the corner of my living area, where a wobbly bookshelf leaned against the wall, threatening to collapse under the weight of my textbooks and novels. An idea sparked, and I seized it, wanting to keep him there a little longer. Hey, I said, hopping down from the counter. Since you're so good at reaching high places, any chance you could help me with one more thing? My bookshelf's a disaster, and I'm scared it's gonna fall over and bury me in psychology books. He raised an eyebrow, but his smile didn't fade, and he pushed off the counter, following me to the living area. 2 favors in one day? You're gonna owe me big time. I'll bake you cookies or something, I said, leading him to the bookshelf, my heart beating a little faster. Come on, it'll take 5 minutes. We reached the bookshelf, a cheap particle board monstrosity I'd bought secondhand, and I pointed to the top where the screws had started to wiggle free. It's loose here, I said, tapping the shelf. I'm not handy, so I'm trusting you not to let my books crush me. He chuckled, taking the screwdriver I handed him from a cluttered drawer. No pressure then. He knelt to tighten the screws, his movements steady and confident, and I sat on the couch nearby, watching him work. There was something oddly comforting about it, the way he focused, his hands sure and precise, his t-shirt pulling tight across his shoulders. I caught myself staring and busied myself rearranging a few books, trying to ignore the flutter in my stomach. You've got a lot of books, he said, glancing over his shoulder as he tightened a screw. Psychology, huh? You really into this stuff? Yeah, I said, pulling a textbook off the shelf, its pages dog-eared from late-night study sessions. I like figuring out what makes people tick, like why someone would drop everything to help their neighbor with a bookshelf. He laughed, looking up at me, his hazel eyes warm. Maybe I'm just a nice guy. Maybe, I said, tilting my head, a grin tugging at my lips. Or maybe you're avoiding your own work. He grinned, tightening another screw. You're too sharp, Emma. I'm gonna have to watch myself around you. I laughed, the sound easing the tension, but that spark was still there, humming in the air. We kept talking as he worked, the conversation flowing easily, like we'd known each other for years instead of months. I told him about my classes, the professor who rambled about Freud for hours, the coffee shop where I worked weekends, dealing with customers who couldn't decide between a latte and a cappuccino. He shared stories about his graphic design projects, how he'd once stayed up all night to finish a logo for a picky client, only for them to change their mind the next day. We laughed about the upstairs neighbors' vacuuming habits, and he teased me about my half-dead plants, calling them survivors, with a grin that made my cheeks warm. When he finished, the bookshelf looked sturdier, and he stood, wiping his hands on his jeans. There, he said, stepping back to admire his work. No more book avalanches. You're a lifesaver, I said, standing to, my shoulder brushing his as I moved to put a book back. The touch was brief, but it sent a jolt through me, and I caught his eye, seeing that same warmth, that same curiosity. Seriously, thanks. I owe you, like, a whole bakery at this point. He chuckled, his voice low. I'll settle for those cookies you promised. But no pressure. We moved back to the kitchen, and I offered him a glass of water, needing an excuse to keep him there a little longer. He accepted, and we stood by the counter, sipping our drinks, the conversation shifting to lighter things. Movies we'd seen, music we liked, the best food trucks in town. I told him about my obsession with old rom-coms, how I'd watched When Harry Met Sally at least a dozen times. And he admitted he was a sucker for classic rock, humming a few bars of a Springsteen song that made me laugh. But every now and then our eyes would meet and the air would shift, heavy with something unspoken. I kept reminding myself, he's married, Emma, don't get carried away. But it was hard when he was standing so close, his laugh warm and genuine, his presence filling the room. The conversation drifted to our lives in the building, and I mentioned the flickering light in my bathroom that I'd been meaning to fix. It's probably just a loose bulb, I said, shrugging, but I'm useless with anything electrical. He raised an eyebrow, setting his glass down. You're racking up favors today, he teased, but his smile was warm. Want me to take a look? I'm no electrician, but I can handle a light bulb. I hesitated, knowing I should say no, but the idea of him leaving felt wrong. If you're sure, I said, leading him to the tiny bathroom off the hallway. The space was cramped, with a small sink, a mirror that needed cleaning, and a shower curtain printed with cartoon cacti. The light flickered above us, casting a stuttering glow over the tiles. He reached up to the fixture, his arm brushing mine as he twisted the bulb. Let's see, he said, his voice focused but soft. The light steadied and he grinned, stepping back. Fixed. You're gonna have to start calling me Mr. Handyman. I laughed, leaning against the sink, the small space making us stand closer than I'd expected. Mr. Handyman, huh? Don't get cocky. You've still got that grilled cheese challenge to win. He grinned, his eyes locking onto mine, and for a moment the bathroom felt too small, the air too warm. You're relentless, he said, his voice low, teasing. But I like a challenge. My heart raced and I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady. Good, I said, matching his tone, because I don't go easy on anyone. We stood there, the silence stretching between us, filled with unspoken tension. I knew I should move, lead him back to the living room, but my feet stayed rooted, my eyes locked on his. He was married. I was just the neighbor, but the way he was looking at me, like he was seeing me for the first time, made it hard to think straight. He cleared his throat, stepping back, breaking the moment. I should probably get back to work, he said, his tone reluctant, like he didn't want to leave. Deadlines don't wait. Yeah, of course, I said, my voice softer than I meant it to be, my heart sinking a little. I led him back to the living room, grabbing his jacket from the couch where he'd tossed it. Here, I said, holding it out for him. He slipped it on, and my hands brushed his shoulders as I adjusted it, the touch lingering just a moment too long. When he turned, we were close and the air felt electric, like a storm about to break. Thanks for the help, I said, my voice soft, my eyes locked on his. You're kind of amazing. He smiled, his eyes warm and searching, like he was trying to figure out what to say. Anytime, Emma. You know where to find me. My heart raced and I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady. I'll hold you to that, I said, matching his tone. I stepped back, opening the door, but I couldn't resist one last tease, needing to lighten the moment before it consumed me. Next time, bring your grilled cheese game, okay? He grinned, leaning against the doorframe, his eyes never leaving mine. Count on it. See you around, Emma. As he stepped into the hallway, I closed the door behind him, leaning against it, my heart pounding. The cool wood pressed against my back, but it did nothing to cool the warmth in my chest. I knew it was wrong that sparked between us. He was married and I was just the neighbor. But as I stood there, the memory of his touch, his smile, his voice lingered, a secret I'd carry until the next time. Thanks for listening to my confession, guys. I hope you felt that spark as much as I did. If you loved this story, please like and subscribe for more.